You are standing beside a campfire 40,000 years ago. The flames crackle against the darkness. A child laughs somewhere behind you. Hunters return carrying fresh meat. An old woman divides it among the families. Nobody writes anything down. Nobody signs a contract. Nobody wears a badge. There is no courtroom, no police officer, no prison. And yet, nobody takes more than their share. Nobody attacks another member of the group without consequences. Everyone already knows what they are allowed to do. What happens if they don't? For nearly all of human history, there were no written laws, no governments, no judges. Yet human societies survived. Children grew into adults. Families raised generations. People cooperated with complete strangers inside their own tribe. So here's the question. How did humans invent laws? The answer does not begin inside a palace. It doesn't begin with kings. It doesn't even begin with civilization. It begins with something much older. Fear. Because before humans ever obeyed written laws, they obeyed something far more powerful. Other humans. Think about what that means. If you lived in a band of 30 people, every single person knew everything about you. They knew whether you were generous. They knew whether you cheated. They knew whether you lied. They knew whether you stole food. And perhaps most importantly, they never forgot. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have repeatedly observed something remarkable. Most of these societies have almost no formal authority, no police, no prisons, no kings. Instead, they rely on reputation. Among the Kung people of southern Africa, among the Hadza of Tanzania, and among many indigenous hunter-gatherer groups documented over the last century, social order was maintained through gossip, ridicule, exclusion, and collective memory rather than written punishment. If someone became arrogant, people mocked them. If someone refused to share, people remembered. If someone repeatedly endangered the group, they could be expelled. And in a world where survival depended entirely on your community, being expelled was often a death sentence. The first law wasn't written on stone. It was written inside other people's memories. Now think about your own life. Imagine every mistake you ever made instantly becoming public knowledge. Every lie, every broken promise, every selfish decision. You wouldn't need a police officer watching you. Your community would become the police. For tens of thousands of years, that was enough. But then, humanity made one decision that changed everything. They stopped moving. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans followed animals, rivers, and changing seasons. If food disappeared, they left. If water dried up, they moved. The land belonged to nobody. Or perhaps, it belonged to everyone. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened across parts of the Fertile Crescent. Groups of people began staying in one place. Permanent homes appeared. Storage pits appeared, villages appeared, and suddenly, people had something they had never truly possessed before: property. Think carefully about that word. Property does not exist in nature. A wolf never claims ownership of a mountain. A deer never writes its name on a forest. Ownership is an idea, and ideas require agreement. Imagine spending months building a house with your family. You gather stones. You cut wood. You dig foundations. You store grain for winter. Then one morning another family simply walks in. This is ours now. Without rules, what happens next? Violence. Every single time. The moment humans settled permanently, they needed something stronger than reputation. They needed rules that everyone accepted. Not because they were morally perfect, because they were practical. History rarely changes because someone has a brilliant philosophy. History changes because people discover a better survival strategy. Laws were exactly that, a survival technology. But here's the fascinating part. The earliest laws were never written. They existed as traditions, stories, customs, sacred rituals. Everyone simply knew them. You marry this way. You divide food this way. You settle disputes this way. You bury the dead this way. Generation after generation. Those customs became invisible. Nobody questioned them because they had always existed. Or at least, it felt that way. Psychologists call this normative behavior. People often obey social rules not because they fear punishment, but because breaking them feels wrong. Think about driving. Why do you stop at a red light on an empty road at midnight? No police, no cameras, no traffic. Yet most people still stop. The rule has become internal. Early human societies worked exactly the same way. The law lived inside the mind before it ever lived on paper. But then villages became towns. Towns became cities. And suddenly, memory stopped working. Imagine living among 50 people. You know everyone. Now imagine living among 5,000. You don't know their names. You don't know who owes favors. You don't know who can be trusted. The invisible system collapses. Something new becomes necessary. Rules must become visible, permanent, public, because strangers cannot read your memories. They can only read your laws. And this is where the story accelerates. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence from ancient Mesopotamia suggesting that by roughly 4000 BC, temples were no longer simply religious centers. They became administrative centers. People stored grain there, recorded transactions there, distributed resources there. The temple slowly transformed into something humanity had never seen before, an institution. Institutions remember what people forget. Think about that sentence. Individuals die. Institutions survive. A family elder may remember every agreement made over 30 years, but when that elder dies, the agreements disappear, unless they are written down. Writing would become one of the greatest legal revolutions in history. But surprisingly, writing wasn't invented to tell stories. It wasn't invented for poetry. It wasn't invented for philosophy. It was invented because people kept losing track of who owed what. The earliest clay tablets from Mesopotamia contain lists: grain, livestock, workers, taxes, numbers. Accounting came before literature. Bookkeeping came before history. Before humanity wrote epic poems, it wrote receipts. That sounds almost disappointing, until you realize something extraordinary. Every modern legal system, every mortgage, every business contract, every tax return, every property deed, every passport, every marriage certificate, traces its ancestry back to those simple clay records. Civilization wasn't built with swords. It was built with paperwork. And once humans learned to record agreements, they discovered something even more powerful. If an agreement can be written, it can also be enforced. And for the first time in history, the law no longer depended on memory alone. It could outlive the people who created it. That changed everything. Imagine walking through the streets of an ancient city 5,000 years ago. Thousands of strangers pass beside you. You don't know their names. You don't know their families. You don't know whether they're honest or dangerous. Yet somehow, the city functions. Markets open every morning. Farmers sell grain. Builders construct homes. Merchants lend silver to people they have never met. Children inherit property. Couples marry. Disputes are settled. None of this should be possible. For almost all of human history, trust depended on familiarity. Now society was asking something completely different. Trust a stranger. But why would anyone do that? The answer wasn't kindness. It was predictability. The greatest purpose of law has never been punishment. Its greatest purpose is making tomorrow predictable. Think about buying a house today. You hand over years of savings to someone you've probably known for only a few hours. Why? Because you believe the contract means something. You believe ownership will be recognized. You believe courts exist if someone cheats you. You're not trusting the seller. You're trusting the system. 5,000 years ago, humanity began making the same leap. Only the system looked very different. In southern Mesopotamia, cities like Uruk, and Lagash were growing faster than anything the world had ever seen. Population created opportunity, but it also created conflict. Who owns this field? Who inherits this farm? Who pays this debt? What happens if someone steals grain? What happens if someone kills another person's ox? When only 50 people live together, everyone already knows the answer. When 50,000 live together, they don't. The old customs begin to contradict one another. Different families remember different versions. Powerful people invent convenient memories. Arguments never end. And this is where writing became something more than accounting. It became authority. Once a rule was carved into stone, everyone could point to the same words. Memory became less important. Evidence became everything. But written laws introduced a new problem. Who decides what gets written? Because every law reflects someone's idea of justice, or someone's idea of power, sometimes both. This is where kings enter the story. Not because kings invented law, but because they realized law could strengthen their rule. Few ancient rulers understood this better than the Babylonian king Hammurabi. Around 1754 BC, a massive stone monument was erected in Babylon. At its top stood an image. The sun god Shamash appeared to hand authority directly to the king. Below that image, nearly 4,000 lines of cuneiform text covered the stone. Today we call it the Code of Hammurabi. It contains nearly 300 laws. Some are surprisingly practical. Rules about irrigation, trade, marriage, inheritance, construction, debt, employment, medical fees, agriculture. Others seem astonishingly harsh. If a builder builds a house and it collapses, killing the owner, the builder may be executed. If a son strikes his father, his hand may be cut off. If someone steals, the punishment could be death. Modern readers often focus on the brutality. But that misses the real revolution. For perhaps the first time in history, ordinary people could know the rules before breaking them. Think about that. Before written law, justice depended largely on memory, or whoever happened to be strongest. After written law, the king himself claimed to be bound by fixed rules. Whether that promise was always honored is another question entirely. But the idea had been born. Law should be visible, permanent, public. That single idea changed civilization forever. Yet something even more interesting hides beneath Hammurabi's famous code. Many punishments depended on social status. If you injured a nobleman, the penalty differed from injuring a common laborer. Justice wasn't equal. It was hierarchical. The law protected order more than fairness. That distinction matters. Because modern societies often assume laws were invented to create justice. History suggests something different. Most early laws were invented to create stability. Justice came later, sometimes much later. Imagine being a ruler responsible for 50,000 people. A failed harvest could trigger riots. One unpaid debt could spark blood feuds. One murder could escalate into clan warfare lasting generations, without clear rules. Small conflicts become civil wars. Law reduced uncertainty. Even imperfect law often proved better than endless revenge. And revenge had dominated human history. If someone killed your brother, your family killed theirs. Then their relatives retaliated. Then yours answered back. Violence multiplied. Generation after generation. Anthropologists call this the cycle of reciprocal vengeance. Entire societies could become trapped inside it. Written law interrupted that cycle. Instead of families deciding punishment, an authority decided. The victim lost some personal freedom, but society gained peace. This may have been one of civilization's greatest bargains. Individuals surrendered the right to personal revenge in exchange for collective security. Thousands of years later, philosophers would call this the social contract. But humans had already begun practicing it long before anyone gave it a name. Now consider another question. Why do most people obey laws they dislike? Nobody enjoys paying taxes. Nobody enjoys speed limits. Nobody enjoys bureaucracy, yet billions comply every single day. Fear explains only part of it. Psychologists studying obedience have repeatedly discovered something remarkable. Humans naturally conform to shared expectations. We copy behavior. We imitate groups. We seek approval. Law eventually stopped feeling like an external command. It became part of culture itself. Children learned rules before understanding them. Parents repeated them. Teachers reinforced them. Communities celebrated them. Over generations, laws became traditions. Traditions became identity. Identity became morality. What began as survival slowly transformed into conscience. But law still faced one enormous limitation. Every kingdom had different rules. A merchant traveling across regions might suddenly become a criminal simply by crossing a river. One city allowed something, another prohibited it. Trade suffered. Empires struggled. Expansion demanded consistency. History was preparing for another revolution. Not simply more laws. Universal laws. Rules that claimed to apply to everyone, no matter where they lived, no matter who ruled them. That idea would spread across continents, shape religions, build empires, and eventually become the foundation of nearly every legal system alive today. And once humanity believed that laws could be higher than kings, there would be no turning back. Now imagine standing in the center of ancient Athens. The marketplace is crowded. Merchants shout over one another. Blacksmiths hammer bronze. Children weave between stalls. Philosophers argue beneath stone columns. And somewhere nearby, a man is standing trial, not because a king ordered it, not because a priest demanded it, but because the citizens themselves believe that justice should belong to the community. That idea seems obvious today. It was revolutionary then. For thousands of years, laws had flowed downward, from gods, from kings, from emperors. Ordinary people obeyed. They did not participate. But somewhere along humanity's journey, another question emerged. What if rulers themselves needed rules? Think carefully about that. A law that controls ordinary people is one thing. A law that controls power itself is civilization entering an entirely new stage. This idea appeared in different forms across different cultures. In ancient Rome, magistrates gradually recorded legal principles that eventually became the 12 Tables, allowing citizens to know the law instead of relying solely on aristocratic families to interpret it. Centuries later, Roman jurists began asking questions that sound surprisingly modern. What is ownership? What makes a contract valid? Can intent matter more than action? Is everyone equal before the law? These weren't merely philosophical debates. They were attempts to create rules that could survive generations. Because kingdoms rise, empires fall, but institutions can outlive them all. Think about how strange that is. The Roman Empire disappeared more than 1,500 years ago. Its emperors are gone. Its armies are gone. Its cities became ruins. Yet many legal principles first refined there still influence courtrooms around the world. Ideas can survive longer than civilizations, and law may be one of humanity's most durable ideas. But history was about to reveal something even more remarkable. The strongest laws are not always enforced by fear. They are enforced by belief. Consider religion. Long before governments reached every village, religious traditions shaped daily life. People believed someone was always watching. Not a king, not a soldier, something higher. Whether in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, or later through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, divine authority gave moral weight to rules that no human could constantly enforce. If no one sees you steal, does it still matter? If no court discovers your lie, have you escaped justice? Religious traditions answered with the same fundamental message. Someone knows. This transformed law from an external system into an internal one. Conscience became humanity's invisible courtroom. For perhaps the first time, people obeyed certain rules even when punishment seemed impossible. Fear of society had become fear of oneself. And that distinction changed history. Because civilizations are too large to police every action. No government has enough officers to watch everyone. Even today, most laws work because most people voluntarily obey them, not because they're forced, but because they believe they should. That's one of the greatest paradoxes of civilization. The stronger a legal system becomes, the less force it actually needs. Now think about the modern world. You board an airplane. Thousands of strangers sit beside you. The pilots have never met you. The engineers who built the aircraft never met the pilots. The airport workers don't know the passengers. The fuel suppliers don't know the mechanics. Yet every person trusts every other person. Why? Because behind every interaction exists an invisible web of laws, safety regulations, licensing standards, insurance requirements, international aviation agreements, criminal penalties, consumer protections. Most passengers never think about any of them, but without those rules, modern air travel would collapse overnight. This reveals something extraordinary. The greatest achievement of law isn't punishing criminals. It's allowing strangers to cooperate. Every online purchase, every bank transfer, every hospital, every university, every business, every marriage certificate, every passport, every election depends upon millions of people believing the same invisible system will function tomorrow exactly as it functions today. Law creates predictability. Predictability creates trust. Trust creates civilization. Remove one, and the others begin falling like dominoes. But here's the fascinating part. Laws never stop evolving. The earliest human rules governed food sharing. Later came agriculture, then property, then taxation, then trade, then kingdoms, then constitutions. Today, humanity debates questions our ancestors could never have imagined. Should artificial intelligence have legal responsibility? Who owns digital property? Can algorithms discriminate? Who owns genetic information? Should space have international law? Can nations claim resources on the moon? The questions change. The process does not. Every generation inherits old laws, discovers new problems, and rewrites the rules. In many ways, humanity has been holding the same conversation for 12,000 years. How do millions of strangers live together peacefully? There has never been a final answer, only better answers. Some laws once seemed unquestionable. Slavery was legal across much of the ancient world. Absolute monarchy once appeared inevitable. Women in many societies possessed few legal rights. Children worked dangerous jobs. Entire groups of people were denied citizenship. History reminds us of something uncomfortable. Legal does not always mean just. Every age believes many of its laws are permanent. Most are eventually replaced. Which raises one final question. If laws can change, what actually holds civilization together? The answer isn't paper. It isn't courts. It isn't police. Those are tools. The real foundation has always been agreement. From the first hunter-gatherer band deciding how to divide meat, to the first farming village settling disputes over land, to Babylon carving laws into stone, to Rome organizing a republic, to modern constitutions guaranteeing rights, every legal system begins with the same invisible act. Enough people choose to believe the rules matter. That's all a law really is. A shared agreement backed by collective belief. Without that belief, it's only ink. Think back to where we began. You're standing beside that ancient campfire. No government, no courthouse, no prison, only 30 people trying to survive another winter. They couldn't possibly imagine constitutions, supreme courts, international treaties, human rights conventions, corporate law, digital privacy legislation, or space law. And yet, everything began with them, with one simple realization. If everyone acts only for themselves, everyone loses. If everyone accepts common rules, everyone gains. That idea spread from campfires to villages, to cities, to kingdoms, to nations, and eventually, to the entire planet. Tonight, before you lock your front door, before you tap your credit card, before you cross a street at a green light, before you sign your name, remember this. None of those actions work because of steel, concrete, or technology. They work because billions of people, most of whom will never meet, continue believing in one extraordinary human invention. Not money, not writing, not even governments, but the invisible promise that rules apply to all of us. That promise has survived the rise and fall of empires. It has crossed deserts, oceans, revolutions, and world wars. It is older than every nation alive today. And tomorrow morning, without even noticing, you'll place your trust in it again. Because the greatest law humanity ever invented was the belief that strangers could live together under the same rules.